From constantly being put in solitary confinement for getting into fights, to starting fights with guards for disrespecting him, Mike Tyson's prison fights were brutal and they brought out the worst in him. Here's what actually happened when Mike fought while locked. When frustration boiled over. Picture this. You're one of the most famous people on the planet, locked away in a concrete and steel cage with hundreds of other men, many of whom are looking for any opportunity to test you, to prove themselves, or simply to alleviate their own crushing boredom. Now imagine that the entire facility goes into lockdown for an extended period, somewhere around 60 days, according to Tyson's recollection. During these lockdowns, inmates are confined to their cells for nearly 24 hours a day, with no access to the yard, no trips to the gym, no recreation whatsoever. For a man like Mike Tyson, whose entire existence had been built around physical activity, whose stress relief mechanism was punching things, this kind of forced stillness was psychological torture. The lockdown happened because somebody got stabbed somewhere in the facility, triggering the standard security protocol that essentially freezes all inmate movement until the situation is resolved and the facility returns to a manageable level of control. Day after day passed with Tyson stuck in his cell, unable to burn off the mounting tension and frustration that was building inside him like steam in a pressure cooker with no release valve. The anger wasn't just about being confined, it was about being powerless, about having no control over his environment, about being treated like just another number in the system, despite having been, just months earlier, one of the most powerful and feared men in professional sports. During this time, Tyson has explained that verbal provocations were constant. Some inmates, perhaps emboldened by the temporary equality that lockdown created, or maybe just looking to pass the time by getting a reaction, would say things to him. Disrespectful comments, sarcastic jabs, challenges to his manhood or his conviction. Tyson, trying to maintain his composure and avoid extending his sentence, largely ignored these provocations. But on one particular day, after weeks of this claustrophobic existence, someone said something that crossed the line. Tyson has never specified exactly what was said. He's described it vaguely as something irritable, a comment that in any other circumstance he might have brushed off, but in that moment, with all that pent-up frustration and anger coursing through him, it became the match that lit the fuse. Without hesitation, without thinking about the consequences or calculating the risk to his early release prospects, Tyson walked over to the inmate who had made the comment and, in his own words, just went over there and hit him. It wasn't a boxing match. It wasn't a prolonged brawl with multiple exchanges and dramatic back-and-forth action. It was a single punch, one devastating blow delivered by a man who had spent his entire adult life perfecting the art of transferring maximum force through his fists into another human being's body. The punch landed, the inmate presumably went down, or at least got the message loud and clear, and that was it. The incident was over almost as quickly as it began. No referees, no bell to save anyone, no rounds, just raw, unfiltered violence born from weeks of suppressed frustration finally finding an outlet. What's remarkable about this incident isn't the violence itself, it's what happened afterward, or more accurately, what didn't happen. The punch didn't lead to a full-scale brawl, retaliation from the victim's friends, or even significant official consequences for Tyson. There's no record of him being charged with assault, no reports of additional time being added to his sentence, no extended stay in solitary confinement as punishment. This tells us something crucial about the dynamics of respect in prison. Sometimes, a decisive show of strength actually prevents further violence by establishing clear boundaries and removing ambiguity about where someone stands in the social hierarchy. Tyson has emphasized this point repeatedly. The incident was isolated, brief, and ultimately unremarkable in the grand scheme of his 3-year sentence. He's used it to illustrate how different his prison experience was from the sensationalized narratives that have proliferated online. On his podcast, Hotboxin' with Mike Tyson, he discussed this very incident, explaining how the lockdown's duration and the inability to access physical outlets, like the gym, contributed to a perfect storm of irritability. He wasn't proud of the moment, nor was he particularly apologetic about it. It simply was what it was, a brief loss of control in an environment designed to test the limits of human patience and restraint. But that single punch wasn't just an outburst. It was a window into a much deeper philosophy Tyson carried with him, a philosophy that didn't start in prison, but defined how he survived it, nipping it in the bud. If you want to truly understand how Mike Tyson survived his 3 years in prison without becoming embroiled in constant violence, you need to understand his philosophy of confrontation management, what he calls nipping it in the bud. This approach wasn't something he developed in prison. It was a survival strategy he'd learned growing up in the brutal streets of Brownsville, Brooklyn, and refined during his years navigating the equally cutthroat world of professional boxing. But behind bars, it became essential. The difference between being left alone to do your time in relative peace and becoming a target for every inmate looking to prove something. The concept is deceptively simple, but psychologically sophisticated. When someone tests you, when they make that first probing attempt to see how far they can push you, you respond immediately and decisively. You don't let it slide. You don't tell yourself you'll deal with it if it happens again. You certainly don't report it to the guards and hope the system handles it for you. No, you settle it right there, in that moment, establishing beyond any shadow of doubt exactly who you are and what happens to people who disrespect you. It's a form of preventive violence, if you will, a small demonstration of force designed to prevent the need for larger, more dangerous confrontations down the line. Tyson explained this philosophy in explicit detail during his now legendary 1998 Playboy interview, conducted not long after his second stint in the boxing world following his release. His words paint a vivid picture of prison psychology and the constant testing that high-profile inmates face. People will try you. They'll try the strongest. You have to be a man. They'll try anybody. They start by saying something funny, something sarcastic, to see how far they can go. But you nip it in the bud. You don't let anyone get away with saying anything funny or sarcastic. You have to demonstrate who you are right on the spot. That's what I do. That's who I am. I'm a settler. I'm in my glory in a place like that. Chaos all over. Yeah, they tried me a few times. Let's break down what Tyson is really saying here, because it's a masterclass in understanding institutional power dynamics and social hierarchy in confined environments. First, he acknowledges that challenges are inevitable. People try you, especially if you're perceived as powerful or high status. In prison, where traditional markers of status like money, career success, or social connections are stripped away, dominance hierarchies are established through more primal means: physical strength, willingness to use violence, and reputation. For someone like Tyson, who entered prison with the label heavyweight champion of the world, the target on his back was enormous. Every wannabe tough guy, every actual gang leader, every inmate looking to make a name for himself saw Tyson as the ultimate test. Beat him, and you've beaten the baddest man on the planet. The testing usually starts subtly. An inmate might make a joke at your expense, deliver a sarcastic comment about your conviction or your circumstances, or engage in some form of verbal disrespect that seems minor on the surface. This is the probing phase, the reconnaissance mission, where they're gathering intelligence about how you respond to pressure. Will you laugh it off? Will you ignore it? Will you respond verbally but not physically? Each of these responses communicates something about your boundaries or lack thereof. And in prison, being perceived as someone who tolerates disrespect is an invitation for escalation. Tyson's approach was to eliminate this uncertainty immediately. The first time someone said something funny or sarcastic, he would demonstrate who you are right on the spot. Now, Tyson doesn't explicitly detail what demonstrate means in every instance, but context and his reputation suggest it could range from an aggressive verbal confrontation to physical intimidation to, in some cases, actual violence. The goal was to make it crystal clear that attempting to test Mike Tyson was a high-risk, low-reward proposition. Tyson also mentioned that both he and potential challengers carried makeshift weapons, knives crafted from whatever materials were available. They had them, but they didn't have anything I didn't have. Now, how many times did inmates actually try Tyson during his sentence? He says a few times, which suggests more than the one confirmed punch we discussed earlier, but less than the dozens of confrontations that sensationalized accounts would have you believe. These early tests likely occurred within the first few weeks or months of his incarceration, during the period when his position in the prison social structure was still being established. Once that position was solidified, once it became common knowledge that Mike Tyson was someone who would absolutely respond with force to disrespect, the tests presumably became less frequent or stopped altogether. This is actually one of the paradoxes of prison violence. The inmates who are involved in the most fights are often not the most dangerous ones, but rather those who haven't successfully established their position in the hierarchy. Once everyone knows you're willing and able to defend yourself decisively, the actual need to do so often diminishes. It's the same principle that kept major powers from directly fighting each other during the Cold War. Mutually assured destruction, or in this case, mutual assured pain, creates a deterrent effect. There's also an important distinction to make between the nipping it in the bud philosophy and the single punch incident we discussed in the previous section. The early confrontations where Tyson was settling disputes and establishing boundaries were strategic and calculated. They were about reputation management and social positioning. The lockdown punch was different. That was frustration and emotional release, not strategic thinking. This distinction matters because it shows that even someone as disciplined and aware as Tyson could be pushed to his breaking point under the right or wrong circumstances. Yet even for a man who believed in settling things instantly, not every battle could be won with fists. Some of the most painful hits Tyson took behind bars never came from a punch, they came from words. The tree jumper heckling. While physical violence often dominates discussions of prison life, the psychological warfare that inmates wage against each other can be equally brutal, and in many ways, more insidious and damaging. Mike Tyson experienced this firsthand during the early weeks of his incarceration, when he became the target of a specific and particularly cruel form of verbal harassment involving the slang term tree jumper. This incident, which Tyson first disclosed publicly just 2 months into his sentence, provides a fascinating window into the psychological challenges of being a high-profile inmate serving time for a sex crime, perhaps the most stigmatized category of offense within prison culture. The story begins in June 1992, when CBS News journalist Ed Bradley conducted an hour-long interview with Tyson for the news magazine program Street Stories. The interview, recorded on May 26 and broadcast on June 18, 1992, marked Tyson's first major media appearance since beginning his sentence, and it drew massive public interest. Here was one of the most famous athletes in the world speaking from behind bars, and people were hungry for any details about how he was handling the dramatic fall from grace that had taken him from earning $30 million per fight to mopping floors in a prison recreation department. During this interview, Tyson revealed that some inmates had taken to yelling a phrase at him as he walked through the facility. "Mike Tyson, you tree jumper." Initially, Tyson admitted, he completely misunderstood what they were saying. He thought they were complimenting his athletic ability, referring to him as someone so powerful and agile that he could jump out of trees. A strange compliment, to be sure, but in the context of his boxing prowess, not entirely implausible. You can almost picture the scene. Tyson, walking back to his cell or heading to his prison job, hearing these shouts, maybe even feeling a small surge of pride that his fellow inmates recognized his physical capabilities. But then someone explained to him what tree jumper actually meant in prison slang, and the reality hit him like a punch he never saw coming. The term is a derogatory slur for a rapist, specifically evoking the image of a predator who hides in or behind trees to ambush unsuspecting victims, often with the added implication that the victims are children or other vulnerable individuals. It's one of the most stigmatized labels you can carry in prison, where there's a strict hierarchy of crimes, and those convicted of sex offenses occupy the lowest rung. Even among convicted criminals, there's a sense of moral hierarchy, and sexual predators are viewed with particular contempt and often face violence, ostracization, or worse. Tyson's reaction to learning the true meaning was captured in the CBS interview. "One day, Mike Tyson, you a tree jumper and I didn't know the tree jumper. What I thought it meant like I was a great athlete if I make jumping out of trees. And I would talk about what the tree jumper jumps of the reapers. You wait for a little kid to go by. You jump up the tree and grab, oh Christ, you know me. I said I can't believe it, know me." The fractured syntax captures Tyson's emotional state, shock, disgust, and the sudden realization of just how low his reputation had fallen in the eyes of these men, many of whom were themselves convicted of serious crimes. This wasn't just casual name-calling or the kind of playful verbal sparring that might happen among inmates who have developed some rapport. This was targeted harassment designed to dehumanize and isolate. Tyson described how the taunts put you in a different assortment mentally, meaning they fundamentally altered how he perceived himself and how others perceived him within the prison ecosystem. He was no longer Mike Tyson, the heavyweight champion. He was Mike Tyson, the tree jumper, a sexual predator, someone less than human, someone who deserved whatever bad things happened to him. The psychological impact of this kind of sustained harassment can't be overstated. Tyson was already dealing with the massive stress of incarceration itself, the loss of freedom, freedom, the separation from loved ones, the constant threat of violence, the grinding boredom punctuated by moments of terror. Now add to that the daily reminder that even here, among convicted criminals, he occupied one of the lowest possible social positions. Every time he walked through the cell block and heard those shouts, it was a fresh wound, a reminder of his conviction and the public perception that he was guilty regardless of his own claims of innocence. What makes this incident particularly relevant to our discussion of Tyson's prison fights, or lack thereof, is that the tree jumper harassment was exactly the kind of provocation that could have easily escalated into physical violence. These weren't subtle verbal jabs or mild teasing. These were serious accusations and insults designed to provoke a reaction. For someone with Tyson's explosive temper and history of responding violently to perceived disrespect, the restraint he showed in not attacking every inmate who yelled this slur is actually remarkable. Tyson has revisited this incident in subsequent interviews and discussions, always framing it as one of the psychological challenges of his incarceration rather than a source of physical confrontations. In later reflections, Tyson has spoken about how prison forced him to develop a different kind of toughness, not the physical toughness of withstanding punches in the ring, but the psychological toughness of enduring constant disrespect, isolation, and stigma without allowing it to destroy your sense of self. And while inmate harassment tested Tyson's patience, the real friction often came from a different direction entirely: the guards who controlled his every move. The May 1992 disciplinary hearing. Beyond the sensationalized fight narratives, Mike Tyson's prison record includes documented disciplinary incidents that provide insight into his actual behavior behind bars. One of the earliest and most significant of these occurred just weeks into his sentence, resulting in a formal hearing and concrete consequences that affected the length of his incarceration. On May 8, 1992, barely 6 weeks after Tyson began his sentence, a prison disciplinary hearing found him guilty of 2 offenses related to verbal threats against prison staff. These weren't physical confrontations, but they revealed the tension and frustration Tyson was experiencing as he adjusted to incarceration and dealt with authority figures who now controlled virtually every aspect of his life. The first offense was initially charged as threatening a prison guard but was reduced to disorderly conduct, classified as a Class C violation under Indiana Department of Correction rules. While the specific words Tyson used haven't been publicly disclosed, the incident involved him making verbal threats during a confrontation with a guard, likely during a routine interaction like cell inspection, movement between areas, or some other point of potential friction in the highly regulated prison environment. The second offense was threatening staff members, classified as a more serious Class B offense, to which Tyson pleaded guilty. This occurred during a discussion in a supervisor's office, suggesting that what might have started as an attempt to address some issue or complaint escalated into Tyson making threatening remarks when he became agitated. These incidents are particularly revealing about Tyson's mindset in the early weeks of his sentence. In later interviews, he's admitted to being a real troublemaker during his prison time, specifically noting that his problems were mainly with guards rather than inmates. The consequences of these infractions were concrete and significant. Tyson lost 15 days of good credit time, also called good behavior credits, which are accumulated by inmates who follow rules and can reduce their overall sentence length. This extended his earliest possible release date to April 9, 1995. He was also ordered to serve 10 days in segregation, solitary confinement, though he had already completed 5 days by the time of the hearing, so only 5 additional days were added. While 15 days might not seem like a massive addition to a 6-year sentence, it's significant in the context of how parole and early release work in the prison system. Good time credits can add up to substantial sentence reductions for inmates who consistently follow rules, and losing those credits means additional time served. The fact that this happened so early in his sentence was also concerning from a parole perspective. It suggested to authorities that Tyson might be a difficult prisoner who would accumulate more infractions over time. These May incidents weren't Tyson's only disciplinary problems. In March 1993, nearly a year later, he insulted a guard during a disagreement over instructions alongside other inmates. This led to an additional 30 days being added to his sentence. Again, notably, this was a verbal incident rather than a physical altercation. Tyson was smart enough or controlled enough to know that actually assaulting a guard would have far more serious consequences, potentially including additional criminal charges charges, significant extension of his sentence, and transfer to higher security facilities. These documented incidents paint a clear picture of Tyson's reality, but they also stand in stark contrast to the stories people want to believe about his time behind bars. The mythical gang leader knockout. Of all the stories that circulate about Mike Tyson's time in prison, perhaps none has captured the public imagination quite like the legend of the gang leader knockout. You know the one. Tyson, freshly arrived at the Indiana Youth Center, immediately catches the attention of a feared gang leader who controls significant portions of the prison population through intimidation, violence, and strategic alliances. This gang leader, depending on who's telling the story, might be affiliated with the Aryan Brotherhood, the Latin Kings, a Blood Set, or some other notorious prison gang. The specifics vary, but the core narrative remains consistent. This feared inmate sees the famous boxer as either a threat to his authority or an opportunity to enhance his own reputation by putting down a celebrity. The legend typically progresses with the gang leader approaching Tyson in a common area, the yard during recreation time, the cafeteria during a meal, or perhaps the shower area during hygiene hours. Verbal taunts are exchanged, with the gang leader mocking Tyson's conviction, questioning his manhood, or generally trying to provoke a reaction in front of an audience of dozens of witnesses. To provoke a reaction in front of an audience of dozens of witnesses. Tyson, in these tales, initially attempts to defuse the situation, not wanting to extend his sentence or create unnecessary complications, but the gang leader won't let it go, escalating the verbal confrontation to physical intimidation, perhaps getting in Tyson's face, maybe pushing him, or even throwing the first punch. And then, according to the legend, Tyson responds with the kind of devastating power that made him the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history. A single punch, often described as a right cross or hook, connects with the gang leader's jaw or temple, and the feared inmate drops like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious before he hits the ground. The injuries are supposedly severe, facial lacerations requiring stitches, broken or lost teeth, possible fractures to the jaw or cheekbone. The message is clear and immediate. Mike Tyson is not to be tested. From that moment forward, according to these accounts, Tyson enjoys 3 years of relative peace, with his reputation as someone who can and will knock you out cold, serving as an impenetrable shield against further challenges. It's a hell of a story, right? It has everything: a clear protagonist and antagonist, dramatic tension, explosive action, and a decisive resolution that establishes social order. It fits perfectly with our preconceptions about how prison works and how someone like Mike Tyson would navigate that environment. But here's the most compelling piece of evidence against the gang leader knockout story. Mike Tyson himself has never corroborated it. And Tyson is not someone known for being shy about his accomplishments or reluctant to share dramatic stories from his life. He's given countless interviews, appeared on numerous podcasts, written an autobiography, and generally been quite open about his experiences, including the violent and controversial ones. Yet in all of these accounts, he consistently describes having only one physical altercation during his entire 3-year sentence, and his description of that incident, as we've already discussed, bears no resemblance to the dramatic gang leader confrontation. When asked directly about his prison fights, Tyson's response is remarkably consistent. "Just one time I had to punch someone. Somebody said something and I just went over there and hit him. We were locked down and couldn't go to the gym." No mention of a gang leader. No description of a knockout in front of dozens of witnesses. No details about severe injuries or establishing dominance through a spectacular display of violence. Just a simple acknowledgement of a single punch thrown in frustration during a lockdown. Hardly the stuff of prison legend. And that's the truth. Not the legend, not the prison folklore. Just the raw, unembellished reality of how Mike Tyson actually navigated 3 of the most difficult years of his life. If you enjoyed this video, click on the boxes playing on your screen to watch similar content.